Hello, my name is David Strain. I'm president of APS. It's a systems development company focusing on attempting to find solutions to address climate change. We do have international patents granted to us with respect to a significant climate change solution. We also work a lot on HVAC systems on attempting to improve the energy performance with respect to them. A lot of it is just basically applying common sense, but we've had results that have exceeded 50% in energy reductions in buildings. This particular video focuses on a type of systems called a multizone, and again, it can have significant improvement with proper adjustments. We'll present it with 5 slides. The first slide is a picture of fans for a conventional system and also for a conservation circuit. This page illustrates the same multi-zone air handling system with the conventional control design in the upper portion and the conservation design below. As illustrated, a multi-zone system has the ability to draw air back from the occupied space through the return fan. The return air can either be exhausted outdoors through the exhaust damper or partially recirculated. The recirculated air is directed back into the mixing plenum on the suction side of the supply fan where it is blended with outdoor air. In the conventional design, this mixed air is controlled to a fixed 13 degrees Celsius during cold weather, then discharged to the supply of the cold deck and the hot deck. The cold deck operates during summer when mechanical cooling is available, cooling the air to 13 degrees Celsius. The hot deck is activated during the wintertime, and its temperature resets directly as a function of outdoor temperature, getting progressively hotter as the outdoor conditions become colder. At times, satisfied zone thermostats achieve the desired supply temperature by, for example, 21 degrees Celsius by mixing cold deck air at 13 degrees Celsius with hot deck air. Ironically, this blended supply air is often delivered at roughly the same temperature as the air being returned by the return fan. In other words, if the system were just simply left alone without imposing unnecessary cooling from the cold deck or heating from the hot deck, it could have recirculated the return air, added only minimum required outdoor air for ventilation purposes, and delivered supply air at approximately 21 degrees Celsius with no additional heating or cooling. The lower illustration presents this more logical control circuit. Return air at 21 degrees Celsius is fully recirculated rather than exhausted, with only the required quantity of outdoor air introduced to satisfy ventilation code requirements. In many cases, though not always, the difference between the supply fan and the return fan volumes already is equal to the minimum outdoor air quantity. The blended air is then discharged from the supply fan at approximately 21 degrees Celsius without need for artificially cooling the cold deck or excessively heating the hot deck when all zones are satisfied. This example shows only 3 zone thermostats, but multi-zone systems may have as few as 2 or as many as a dozen or more. Regardless of the number of zones, the conventional system is inherently inefficient. The conservation circuit tends to inject some common sense into the circuit that minimizes the conflict between heating and cooling. The warmest zone can force the cold deck supply temperature downward once that zone has fully closed its hot deck damper and fully opened its cold deck damper. The cold deck temperature can only be gradually reduced to the original design limit of 13 degrees Celsius. Conversely, the cold zone can force the hot deck temperature supply upward once its thermostat has fully opened its hot deck damper and fully closed its cold deck damper. The hot deck temperature can only increase within the limits established by the original hot deck reset schedule. This logic tends to minimize the temperature difference between the hot deck and the cold deck on a continual basis. The second image is from the Scarborough Board of Education, where their engineer calculated that we reduced the energy in 2 of their buildings by more than 50%, and they had multi-zone systems in them. This page was prepared by a manager from the Scarborough Board of Education, indicating the reductions in energy we achieved on buildings that we retrofitted for them. The significance of the page with respect to multi-zone systems is that the gas sections of both West Hill Collegiate and also of Wendell Stanton Public School were both gas-driven sections, and we achieved reductions by their calculations greater than 50%. The common sense logic of it is just what we used within this video. The third image we're presenting is the logical staging that a zone has to go through on a multi-zone system. This page illustrates the staging sequence followed by each thermostat in a multi-zone system, ranging from maximum heating demand at 20 degrees Celsius to maximum cooling demand at 24 degrees Celsius. When all thermostats are modulating their dampers to blend warm air from the hot deck with cold air from the cold deck, they should remain stable without adding additional heating or cooling. Under these conditions, all zones are operating with approximately a half a Celsius degree of their set point, indicating the building is already in balance. If the coolest zone thermostat reduces its signal to the point where its zone dampers are driven to 100% hot deck, any further decrease in its signal is then permitted to stage additional heating. At that point, the hot deck temperature is allowed to increase, limited by the original design reset schedule. Because that zone is no longer blending heated air with cold air, the system can satisfy the space using the minimum possible heat input while maintaining occupant comfort. At the opposite end of the scale, if the warmer zone thermostat increases its signal as the dampers are at 100% cold deck and the zone temperature continues to rise, the control logic then allows the cold deck temperature to decrease further. This provides only the additional cooling required to maintain that zone within the comfort zone. This control strategy continually minimizes the temperature difference between the hot deck and the cold deck, thereby maximizing overall system energy efficiency. The next image we're presenting is a comparison on a graph with respect to the heating input for the hot deck with regard to the outside air reset that's original in conventional designs, comparing that to resetting the hot deck temperature based on the actual requirements of the coldest room. This graph illustrates that resetting heating systems based solely on outdoor air temperature neglects a substantial portion of the building's actual heating requirements. In this example, the black line represents hot water heating temperature. However, the same principle applies to hot deck temperatures in multi-zone air handling units. The black line representing actual heating input responds not only to outdoor air conditions, but also to internal heat gains from occupants, lighting, and normal daytime activities. As these transient heat sources increase, the requirement for the heating supply system decreases to compensate. Around lunchtime, when internal heat gains temporarily diminish in the coldest zone, the heating supply temperature rises, then decreases again in the afternoon as the internal heat gains return. On the second day shown, the conventional outdoor reset strategy would have increased the heating supply temperature in response to the falling outdoor conditions. Instead, the heating medium temperature decreased because the internal thermal gains were already satisfying a significant portion of the heating requirement. This provides a practical example of how outdoor air only reset strategies fail to reflect the true heating requirements of a building. Altering to a conservation logic results in improved occupant comfort and significant reduction in energy consumption. The last image we're presenting are two graphs. One is to compare the mixed air temperature, or the cold deck, which is the same, to what the conventional design has for the cold deck in the regular multi-zones. And also on the second graph, there's a comparison between the hot deck temperature being reset from outdoor temperatures as opposed to being reset from the coldest room as a common sense logical approach. The lower graph on this page illustrates the temperature differential between the conventional cold deck design, typically maintained at a constant 13 degrees Celsius, and a conservation demand-based control strategy driven by the actual cooling requirement of the warmest room, after its zone dampers are positioned to not blend hot air with the cold air it's demanding. The purple line represents the original design cold deck temperature, which is the mixed air temperature in the winter and mechanical cooling in the summer. The blue line shows the control signal from the warmest room, which determines how much cooling the system truly needs. The black line represents the actual cooling requirement, floating between 15 degrees Celsius and 19 degrees Celsius. By allowing the warmest room to control the system, A cold deck temperature is consistently maintained above the original design temperature, avoiding unnecessary overcooling. The upper graph compares the hot deck temperature under the conservation control strategy with the original building design. The red line shows the original hot deck design temperature based on outdoor temperature, ranging from 27 degrees Celsius to 38 degrees Celsius. The coldest room demand is allowed to control the hot deck after it has positioned its zone dampers to not blend cold air with the hot air that it is demanding. The operating temperature range drops to approximately 24 degrees Celsius to 28 degrees Celsius based on actual heating demand rather than a fixed reset schedule. Although the hot deck temperature is still limited by the outdoor reset logic, minimizing temperature difference between the hot deck and the cold deck significantly improves overall energy system performance, reducing both simultaneous heating and cooling and unnecessary energy consumption. Now, we do have a very serious problem considering the children's well-being in the future. There are two issues. One is the psychological impact of climate change on them, which the BBC presented a survey on a few years ago. And the second issue is the fact that we're going to run out of all fossil fuels within the lifetime of the children. These reports can be seen on our website at apscontrols.org through an article there. It says Fighting Climate Worry. Now, we are not trying to get donations from anybody. We're not after your money, but we do wish for your support politically, for your voice to go to the politicians and express to them that the children's future is very important and all positive actions should be looked at with respect to taking care of the kids. Thank you very much for watching this video.